So this is a video response to a comment I got on the last video I posted, where I posted what I had read out of the audiobook of the kind of lore, backstory, kind of little novella, I guess you'd call it, I wrote of the history and lore for the world of my fantasy series I've been working on for the last couple years, to be honest. I've taken a little longer to get this first book out than I had initially planned when I started. I'll freely admit that. Makes me sympathize with authors who get kind of longer delays than they'd planned between books a little bit. But so I put up what I had read out of the backstory I wrote, and I got a comment asking for more details on the premise of the world and specifically the novel that this is actually the backstory to. So I figured I'd just fire up the old microphone and not do anything scripted, just kind of chat a little bit about it. So the series as a whole is called Earthcross. It's a name I actually came up with a long time ago. I'm talking like back in high school, and multiple stories have kind of been contained within that. The overall title for the series, so I've always stuck with that title just because I enjoy it. I like short, snappy, 2 syllables, perfect. But so I guess I would just expand a little bit on it. As I talked about in that previous video where I read out some of the lore I had written down, the ancient lore of the world revolves mostly around the assorted trials and tribulations and wars of a quartet of gods or godly figures. I'm intentionally non-specific about it, called Zoengard, Tiamos, Acacia, and later Zoengard's half-human daughter, Jaya. And the 4 of them will, over their centuries of influence throughout the world, transform the world from a more initially primordial state before their arrival to something more resembling kind of medieval times, right? Zoengard either created or found, again, I'm intentionally ambiguous on it, a substance called mage metal to give the power of Khan, aka the word for magic, basically, in this world, to humans throughout a continent called Odlin. And mage metal was also mutated later into various other forms by those other godly figures. First, Tiamos made it into golden star metal, which grants elemental wizardry, your classic fireballs and lightning bolts and psionic powers and whatnot. Acacia made it into the red witch metal, which grants the power of necromancy, basically, to raise and use armies of zombies and whatnot. While Jaya would later, after these first 3 forms, create the green form of cure metal, which grants basically the power of healing magic. And beings called Khan Knights can control the mage metal and their various powers and properties. And so much of the ancient lore revolves around an event called the Acacian Wars, which rocked the world for decades. Both Odlin itself, this main continent, I show kind of my primitive map I made here, and the lands across the seas, such as the Skull Lands and the Joven, aka the 40 Isles. And this war was eventually won by Jaya and her Medic Knights, and it was Jaya who went on to oversee a century of peace throughout the lands, but eventually, being half-human, passed away. And that kind of... there's a lot more than that in the book I wrote out. In fact, I wrote out dozens of pages about the Acacian Wars and the various campaigns and twists and turns and how it affected the various lands and the burning of the old woodlands in the center of the continent, which would later rise again as the young woodlands, another of Jaya's miracles. But I won't go into all that. Needless to say, there's a ton of it, but it would be a little too much to go into all that. It's part of why I never finished out reading out that audio book, because I just stared at the just dozens of pages I wrote, and I was like, oh god, that's gonna take a long time to read out and edit. And anyway, then the Acacian Wars and the era of Jaya's reign was followed by extensive millennia of the Dark Ages, or the godless times, where magic receded. And I wrote out quite a bit about that too. And Odlin, this continent, was eventually, throughout various campaigns and alliances and wars, and formed borders, what would be the 9 realms, which would be Etheria, sort of the city-state in the east, Zelestria in the west, Caldris, which is sort of the nomadic tribes to the south, Eldwin, the forest folk to the north, Icewilds all the way up at the north, the Castian Empire, which is here called Castus, up in the sort of northwestern reach, a more kind of militaristic people, Vamir down in the southwest, I guess, the Summer Realms, more kind of desert area down there, and Allure, the mountainous, the enormous, sparsely populated, difficult to traverse mountain countries that kind of divide the main realms from the Castian Empire, Castus. I won't go through all the details of everything I wrote out lore-wise, but eventually, needless to say, magic and mage metal rose again in prominence millennia beyond the initial godly figures. There's civil wars between Zelestria and Etheria, plus Etheria making war across the center sea on the eastern continents across the lands, which I don't have any maps of, but figures called the Eelmancers rose throughout the center sea, who control these, battleship-sized great eels. I think, like the worms in Dune, maybe even bigger than that, right? So about 300 years before the actual start of the proper first novel, the hero Veldraxus formed the holy order called the Companions of the Ytterdell to combat the warlock king Rantarek. This is another war called the Great Khan Wars that I wrote out way too much detail on the various campaigns and twists and turns of. But anyway, Veldraxus would eventually sacrifice himself to destroy the great lightning golem Kalasmatul and Rantarek himself. But before Veldraxus' sacrifice, he lifted his friend Galen Windstrom to the throne of the now unified kingdom of Birthland, which is what you see pictured here. The king being protected by the 4 high Khan Knights of the Dor Soldraxius, the Spring Guard, the Summer Guard, the Autumn Guard, and the Winter Guard. And obviously, as those various knights age out or pass away, they're replaced by new versions of each. And that basically takes us to the present times. I just summed up about 200 pages of lore that I wrote in about 7 or 8 minutes. So I really, that was a mega fast forward through things, but that sums up the most key details. In present times, we have the so-called Millennia War. It's actually been raging for about 300 some odd years, but it's called the Millennia War between Birthland and the Acasians in the Skull Lands across to the east across the sea. But there's also simultaneously a conflict with the Eelmancers throughout the ocean, a low-level pulsating up and down kind of conflict with the Castus on the other side of the mountains. Now and then they rename themselves the Castian Empire and again try to make war on the mainland, despite technically being part of Birthland, as part of the alliances formed by Veldraxus back in the day. And of course, there's also some brewing unrest between the great icy country of Zal Alder on the North Pole of this world and various other countries, but I won't get too into all that. Some of the main things you need to know is that the main kind of industries of Birthland are perhaps war, obviously, but also mining, especially the mining of mage metal. The Elorian mining sector, the vast mountainous country that takes up a huge bulk of Birthland's kind of a land area, albeit, as I said, being very sparsely populated compared to the realms to the south. So the Elorian mining sector is consistently bustling with miners, prospectors, shanty towns, industry, bandits, mercenaries, warlords, everything else you can imagine. Obviously heavy inspiration like the American Old West, like oil prospectors, gold mining towns, that kind of thing. The heavy heavy shades of like the American Western in my kind of a depiction of that. Picture dusty old saloons and showdowns and wooden towns clinging to the side of mountains and canyons and rattlesnakes and whatnot. I definitely heavy inspiration that sort of genre in lore, which will be important to the novel I'm about to get into. What other lore is there to know before I go into it? They have the Magi Military Academies, they're called, which There's a few dozen of them throughout the country, which a lot of them will draft kids with con potential who have to pass trials at them to become con knights as they grow up there. There's quite a few of these academies, but the main two ones to know for the premise of the lore are the Forest Academy of the Guard in the north and the Desert Academy called the Mark in the south. What else? There are lizard folk called the Shiori Fall. They mostly live south of Birthland, but there are a fair number in Birthland itself. And insect folk called the Korowaki. There's also golems, there's wyverns, there's dryads, and there's gaunts, aka that's just my word for zombies, basically. But yeah, I guess that's enough lore to get started. That's, like I said, it's very much a bird's eye view of everything, a rapid speed fast forward of everything, but that hits the main stuff you need to get into the novel itself. So the actual first novel of Earthcross is called Six Swords on Silver Hill, and I'll do a little zoom in on my amateurish map I made of Allure here. I should say that these maps I made like literally a couple years ago. I think the online software I used to make them was called Incarnate, and I'll obviously try to do something that looks a little less silly when I actually try to put it in a proper book. And also put maybe some AI art here that I got from like Midjourney and other AI art generators trying to show ideas of what some stuff in the book might look like. So Six Swords on Silver Hill is the first book of Earthcross. It takes place, at least it starts in the year 329 AV, after Veldraxxus's birth. It is set mostly, I'd say, 95+% in the Allure, the mountainous northern country, largely taking place in and around a plateau mining town partway up Mount Dusk by the name of Valewinds. You can see that on the map here. It's not actually nearly as huge as I made it look on this map. I just really popped it out to show its kind of story prominence. In actuality, it's a town of only like several hundred population initially, so much smaller than it's shown on the map. In actuality, it wouldn't even be visible on this map, except that I made it look bigger to show its story prominence. So the actual plot of Six Swords on Silver Hill is very inspired by kind of like Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, or that kind of a plot setup. So Valewinds is initially set upon by the bandit lord of Prospector Rock, one Lord Goldglove, who steals mage metal and gold and kills many townsfolk. That's kind of the opening chapter. It's sort of try to open it with a bang. It's kind of a scary, violent, sort of a chaotic chapter. At least I tried to make it. I don't know how good my writing actually is, but that's my intention. So the folk of Valewinds end up in between kind of a rock and a hard place with, of course, the Gold Glove, and he promises to return for more, to rob them again, as I mentioned in Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven, but also they are now, because they were robbed, not able to pay their dues to the Mage Metal Mining Cooperative, which operates out of Slim Chapel at the base of Mount Dusk and controls the mining trade of all the hundreds or dozens of little mining towns on Mount Dusk. So the town seeks out mercenaries to protect Valewinds, while meanwhile armies from the city-state of New Voxus to the east of Allura send in battalions to deal with the bandit problem, most prominently the 6th Battalion under the realm's greatest hero, Captain Van Nalbright, because the bandit problem is now intensifying to the point where the Crown, all the way down hundreds of miles to the south of Nytheria, has even noticed, and it's impeded mage metal supply lines, with the mage metal being what they use to wage their war in the Skull Lands across the sea, and so on. So, but little do the folk of Valewinds know that Valewinds has more mage metal reservoirs beneath it than previously thought, which ends up making this little town of a few hundred people the epicenter for major region-shattering events that will bring bandits, lords, mercenaries, knights, barons, and more, all to it, and change the lives of the main characters and Birthland itself forever. I have a character chart here that, as I've gone through it, most of them I came up with before I even started writing the novel. Some I came up with and added to it as I was writing. As of now, I just went through and counted just before starting this recording, and I have 122 named characters of one level of prominence or another in this novel, which obviously I'm not going to go through all that. And before you think That seems a little insane. uh, Obviously, when I say that, that's including even characters who, appear in like one scene and have 2 lines of dialogue, so it's not as insane as it sounds. But there are probably about 30 some odd characters who would count as like major characters, and about maybe 10 or 12 or so who I would consider to be like the main characters. I won't go into all that because it's too many, and leave some discovery for the actual book proper. But I guess the 2 ones I'll mention, the 2 most central would be Darian Draxus. He's a former High Con Knight of the Dorsal Draxius. He was the Summer Guard, protecting the king, who is currently drinking himself to death and just trying to die in fighting pits in Allure after being branded the Betrayer Knight, and exiled and hated all about the country for his cowardice during the battle at Grey Quarter 3 years before the novel starts. And he ends up hired as a swordsman to guard Valewinds. He's one of our main characters. I used an AI art generator called, I think, Art Breeder to make kind of a depiction of what he might look like. I'm not 100% happy with it, but it's kind of a start, and I'll try to do something better at some point in the future. And the other main character I mentioned is Citrine Redflower, born Citrine Al-Khatib. She's a foreign girl from Old Odlin, the desert country, all the way south of Birthland, beneath Shieldspire. And she was drafted for the Magi Military Academy, the Mark, but later expelled when she failed the trials. And she ended up a young wife and mother, and was brought north to Valewinds on kind of a mining expedition before losing her family in a mining disaster. So now she's a young widow, and she's, as the novel starts, she's just a little-known livestock medic in Valewinds. But obviously, things will get more complicated for her and for Darian and for all the other citizens of Valewinds as the novel goes on. And like I said, there's quite a few other major characters, good guys, villains, some morally ambiguous, blacksmith, soldier, other healers, a mage, all kinds of stuff going on. It's definitely talking about kind of the focus and influence of the book. It's definitely an action book. I like that kind of thing. Quite a few battles and fight scenes and chases and whatnot. I'd say I'm kind of in that way inspired by the work of David Gemmell. I think that's how you pronounce it. Legend, etc. King Beyond the Gate, the Draenei Chronicles, I think a series is called. I enjoy his work and his way of writing action. Definitely draw some influence from that. Also a fair bit of a Joe Abercrombie influence in there, I would say. The first Law series and all the subsequent books he's written. I'd say my kind of magic level, so to speak, is somewhat higher than what you might think of as kind of like Game of Thrones style low fantasy. For example, Con Knights can have, literally 50 times human strength. I got some fireball flinging and some psionic powers and that kind of stuff.
Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt!
Well, noting that such beings who could do that kind of stuff probably number less than 1 in 20,000 of people in this universe, so it's not completely insane, just slightly insane. But anyway, I'm like I said, I've been working on it longer than I care to admit, longer than I had intended to, but I've been really trying to focus in the last couple of months. I just kind of had I don't want to describe it as writer's block exactly, because I do know the whole story and how it ends. I mean, I already have everything, the last scene planned out, but I was kind of struggling to get words on the page for a good 6 months earlier this year, so I don't know. But I've been trying to focus in, and I really hope to have it done in the next 2 or 3 months, hopefully available next year. And I do have sequels planned out as well. I haven't decided how many yet, but that's a totally different subject for another day. But yeah, so I hope that's all a sufficient answer to the comment I got asking for more details, and if there's anything else the person who left that comment or anyone else might want to know about anything that I mentioned or anything else on this map, just let me know, and I'm more than happy to make another quick video on it.